My daughter collapsed at my doorstep at 1 in the morning. Her face was swollen, her lips split, her arms covered in bruises that looked too fresh to have faded from anything but rage. She trembled, half-conscious, clutching her coat like it could hold her together. "He beat me," she gasped. "He beat me, for his mistress." For a long second, I said nothing. The words hung between us, heavy and raw, like a confession no mother should ever have to hear. The night outside was silent, too silent. Even the cicadas that usually sang behind the fence seemed to stop. As if the whole world was listening. I didn't rush to hold her. Not because I didn't love her, but because I needed to keep myself from shattering. I had spent a lifetime as a police officer learning what silence could do. Silence steadied your hands. Silence let you see clearly through chaos. So I knelt beside her, examined the bruises one by one, and whispered, "You're safe now, he can't reach you here." But deep down, I knew safety was only temporary. The living room clock glowed 1:07 a.m. in soft blue light. The same clock I'd bought when my husband passed away, my first attempt at filling the quiet. Now, that quiet felt alive again, pressing against the walls as my daughter sobbed into her hands. I brought her a glass of water. Her fingers shook so hard she nearly spilled it. "Mom, he said it was my fault, that I made him angry." Her voice broke, and something inside me did too. I wanted to tell her that monsters like him didn't need reasons. But the part of me that had once sworn to protect the innocent knew words weren't enough. I'd spent 28 years wearing a uniform, chasing men who hurt women and thought they'd get away with it. I'd retired 5 years ago, traded my badge for gardening gloves, told myself I'd seen enough darkness for a lifetime. But as I looked at my daughter, trembling and broken on my couch, I knew darkness had just found its way back into my house. I walked to my closet. The old uniform was still there, pressed and clean, the name tag slightly faded but the badge still gleaming beneath the soft light. The weight of the fabric in my hands felt both foreign and familiar, like touching a part of myself I'd buried. My daughter stared through her tears. "Mom, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I buttoned the shirt, fastened the belt, and slipped the badge into place. The mirror caught my reflection, gray hair, tired eyes, steady hands. I looked nothing like the officer I used to be. Yet somehow, she was still there. I reached for my phone. There was only one number I needed to call. When the line clicked open, I spoke softly. "The plan begins tonight." Then I hung up. Outside, the night was thick with fog. Streetlights blurred into pale halos along the empty road. I stood at the window, watching the faint silhouette of my daughter curled on the couch, her head resting against a pillow that once belonged to her father. This house had always been a sanctuary, a small, one-story home on the outskirts of town, with roses that bloomed in spring and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. It had seen birthdays, graduations, and quiet dinners for two. Now, it was about to see something else. Justice. I didn't plan on vengeance. That wasn't what my badge had ever stood for. But there are moments in life when justice and revenge start to look the same. And a mother's heart doesn't always know the difference. I brewed a pot of coffee. Not because I needed it, but because it gave my hands something to do. The smell filled the kitchen, strong, bitter, grounding. For years, I'd watched victims come into my precinct, women who swore they'd stay silent one more time. Who said it wasn't that bad. I used to wonder what would finally make them walk away. Now I knew. Sometimes, it takes a beating that breaks not just your body, but your belief that love can still save you. My daughter had reached that point. And if the law wouldn't protect her, I would. The phone buzzed once, a text from an old friend. 2 words, "I'm in." I took a deep breath and glanced back at the living room. My daughter was asleep now, exhaustion pulling her under. I tucked a blanket around her shoulders, brushed the hair from her face, and let my voice drop to a whisper. "Sleep, baby, it's my turn now." The kettle whistled softly behind me as I set the phone back down. Somewhere, far off in the quiet, a dog barked once, then stopped. The night held its breath. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin. 2 days before my daughter collapsed at my door, the house had been quiet in the way only an old house could be, softly breathing. Waiting, listening. I woke up before sunrise. As I always did, habit, not rest. The coffee maker sputtered to life, filling the kitchen with the smell of burnt beans and thyme. The radio played faintly from the counter, some local host talking about morning traffic. Storms coming from the west. Rain, I thought. Maybe that was why my knees ached more than usual. The roses outside needed trimming, but I left the shears on the table. There was no hurry. When you live alone long enough, time stops demanding anything from you. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. That was his chair, my husband's. He'd been gone for 7 years, but I still caught myself saving the newspaper for him, folding it neatly on the side he used to sit. It was the kind of muscle memory you don't unlearn, even when your heart does. At 8:15, the phone rang. The screen lit up with her name, Emily. For a second, I hesitated. She usually called on Sundays, never on a Friday morning. I answered anyway. "Mom," she said, her voice was too bright, too even, "just checking in." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "That's new. Everything all right?" She laughed softly, but it cracked halfway through. "Yeah, just a busy week. Don't worry about me." And before I could ask anything else, she added, "Love you," and hung up. I stared at the screen long after it went dark. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence again. Something in her tone had been off, like she was reading from a script written by fear. But I'd promised myself years ago to stop interfering. She had her own life now, her own choices. Still, that night, I dreamed of sirens and glass breaking. The next morning, I met Linda at the diner. She'd served on the force with me back in the day, 15 years of chasing cases that never made the news. Her hair was gray now too, but her eyes still had that sharpness that never softened. We didn't talk about the past. Cops rarely do. She stirred her coffee and said quietly, "You heard about that banker downtown? The one married to your daughter?" My stomach tightened, though I didn't move. I heard he got promoted. He also got a complaint filed against him last week. Employee said he grabbed her arm. Press isn't running it, money talks. I said nothing. The spoon in my hand clinked against the mug once, then went still. Linda leaned back, watching me. "You taught me how to read faces. Remember? So don't lie and say you didn't already know something was wrong." I smiled faintly. "Old habits, huh?" She nodded. "Yeah, old habits keep us alive." Then she reached across the table and put a folded piece of paper near my hand. "Address of the lawyer handling that complaint, just in case you want to see how deep the rot goes." Before I could respond, she stood, paid for both coffees, and walked out into the drizzle. I didn't open the paper right away. Instead, I sat there, tracing the rim of my cup with my thumb, watching rain smear the window glass into slow gray rivers. The world outside looked blurred, people rushing, umbrellas spinning, cars hissing over puddles, and I felt the first quiet pulse of dread settle in my chest. Not panic, not fear, something colder. The kind of feeling that doesn't scream. It waits. Back home, I placed the folded note on the counter. Didn't look at it again for hours. I watered the plants, cleaned the porch, tried to occupy my hands while my mind replayed Emily's voice. "Don't worry about me." That's what every victim says before they vanish behind a smile. The storm hit by evening. Thunder rolled low, distant, like a warning. I turned off the lights and sat near the window, watching the rain carve silver lines down the glass. Across the room, my husband's photograph caught the faint glow from a street lamp. He'd been proud when Emily married that man, called him steady, ambitious. I remember shaking the groom's hand that day, thinking how firm his grip was. Too firm. The phone buzzed once, a text from Linda. Just 3 words. "Be ready tomorrow." I typed nothing back. Instead, I poured myself a small glass of whiskey. The kind I only touched when ghosts came too close. The burn down my throat steadied me more than it should have. When the clock struck midnight, the rain had softened into mist. The paper with the lawyer's address lay untouched beside the empty glass. I should have gone to bed, but instead, I found myself walking to the closet, the same one where my uniform still hung. I didn't open it, not yet. My reflection in the hallway mirror stared back, older, slower, but not done. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured again. 2 days later, at 1 in the morning, someone would pound on that same door, and my world would tilt forever. But that night, I just whispered to the quiet house. Whatever's coming, I hear you. The clock ticked once, then twice, as if answering. And outside, under the whispering rain, justice began to stir. The morning after the storm, sunlight crawled through the blinds like it had forgotten how to be warm. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out the same coffee cup I'd used the day before. The water ran brown for a second, then clear again. Outside, the driveway was still slick with rain, reflecting the gray sky like glass. The world looked clean, but I'd been a cop long enough to know, clean never means pure. I was halfway through my second cup when someone knocked on the door. Not the polite, neighborly kind of knock. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced. Authority. When I opened it, she was standing there, a woman in her 30s. Uniform crisp, badge catching the light. Her name tag read Officer Hayes. For a heartbeat, I saw my younger self in her, sharp eyes, stiff posture, a confidence that hadn't yet learned fear. "Mrs. Grant?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced. Detective Lewis gave me your address." That name froze me for a moment. Lewis. My old captain. He'd retired before I did. "What's this about?" She glanced past me into the living room. Maybe expecting clutter, maybe ghosts. Then she lowered her voice. "It's about your son-in-law, Andrew Keller." The air shifted. The sound of the ticking clock suddenly felt too loud. I stepped aside. "Come in." She set her hat on the coffee table and sat down like someone who hadn't quite decided if she was welcome. I poured her a cup of coffee without asking. Old habit. She took it with both hands. "Ma'am, I shouldn't be sharing this off record, but I thought you'd want to know." Her tone had softened from official to human, always a dangerous shift in our line of work. "There's an open investigation," she said. "Allegations of assault, financial coercion. One of his employees came forward." I stayed quiet, letting the words stack between us like evidence. "He's got influence," she continued. "Good lawyers, friends in the department. The victim's already recanted once." Her fingers drummed once against the mug. "I've seen this before. Cases that start loud, end buried." I looked at her carefully. "You're new enough to still think you can stop that." She smiled, a little sad. "Maybe, but people talk, Mrs. Grant. Some of the evidence doesn't add up. Transfers to private accounts, bruises that don't match the timeline." She hesitated, then added, "Someone mentioned your daughter's name." That last line landed like a bullet. I didn't flinch, but I felt something cold move behind my ribs. "She's not a suspect," Hayes said quickly, "but we think she's connected." I leaned back, letting silence do the work. When you've spent a lifetime interrogating people, you learn that silence is louder than shouting. After a while, she said softly, "You were on the force for almost 30 years, right?" 28, I corrected. She nodded. "Then you know what happens next. If Keller feels cornered, he'll look for someone to blame." I stared at the steam rising from my cup. "He already has." Hayes didn't ask what I meant. Maybe she didn't need to. Instead, she reached into her jacket and slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a photo, grainy, taken from a security camera. Andrew, in a dark parking garage, his hand gripping a woman's arm too tightly. Not Emily, someone younger, terrified. I didn't say a word. I just studied his face, the calm arrogance, the way his jaw set like he owned the world. Monsters rarely look like monsters. That's what makes them so good at surviving. Hayes stood to leave. I shouldn't have brought this, she said, almost apologetic, but sometimes, the right person needs to see what the system won't show. At the door, she paused. If you hear from your daughter, tell her to be careful. He's losing control. When she was gone, the house went quiet again, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant drip of water in the sink. I sat there a long time, staring at that photo. Then I slipped it into the drawer beside my old badge. That afternoon, the clouds returned. The light outside turned dull, flat, like the world had lost interest. I walked through the house checking locks, a habit that had never quite left me. Every bolt, every latch, clicked into place. The sound was comforting, rhythmic, like punctuation marks in a confession. I picked up the phone twice, tried calling Emily, and stopped both times before the ring could finish. What would I say? Your husband is being investigated for beating women who remind him of you? No, she'd just tell me I was overreacting. She always did. Victims often defend their monsters until the bruises turn to scars. By sunset, the rain started again, thin and cold. I stood by the window watching the drops trail down the glass, thinking of every case I'd ever worked where someone said, "We never saw it coming." They always did, they just didn't want to believe it. I turned on the porch light. It flickered once before holding steady. That glow, faint and tired, spilled across the driveway where her car used to park. For the first time in months, I felt something dangerous stir in me, not fear, not sorrow. Resolve. I walked to my study and opened the drawer where I'd placed the photo. Beneath it was a leather-bound notebook, my old case log. Each page filled with names, dates, patterns. I flipped it open, wrote one new entry at the bottom. Subject: Andrew Keller. Status: pending investigation. Notes: personal interest, high risk, unstable. My handwriting looked steady, colder than I remembered. I closed the book, pressed my palm against the cover, and whispered, "Not this time." Outside, thunder rolled far away again, as if agreeing. Somewhere between the storm clouds and the silence, I knew a line had been crossed, one that no law could fix. The badge in the drawer gleamed faintly under the desk lamp. For the first time in years, I didn't look away. That night, I couldn't sleep. The photo Hayes left on my table kept bleeding through my thoughts. Grainy and gray, replaying behind my eyelids. The hum of the refrigerator was too loud, the tick of the clock too steady. The house was breathing again, and I could feel its pulse under my skin. I poured myself another cup of coffee, though I'd lost count hours ago. Outside, the streetlights flickered through the fog, stretching thin shadows across the kitchen floor. The kind of light that makes you remember things you've spent years trying to forget. I used to think memory faded like an old photograph, soft, painless. It doesn't. It waits. It hides behind every smell, every sound, every silence. And sometimes, like tonight, it forces you to watch what you ignored. It was 6 years ago, the night before Emily's wedding. The backyard was strung with fairy lights, laughter spilling from every corner. Her fiancé, Andrew, stood by the grill, talking too loud, smiling too wide. Everyone loved him then, charming, polished, the kind of man who knew which fork to use at dinner and how to make people believe he cared. I'd retired from the force 2 months earlier. The department gave me a plaque, a handshake, and a reminder that my pension wouldn't keep up with inflation. I remember looking at Andrew that night and thinking, at least my daughter will be taken care of. She deserved that, stability. I mistook composure for character. Halfway through the evening, I went inside to grab another bottle of wine. That's when I saw them, Emily and Andrew, in the hallway near the stairs. His hand gripped her wrist, just for a second, too tight. Her smile didn't break, but her eyes darted toward the door where I stood. When he noticed me, he let go, smoothed his collar, and said, "Just a little pre-wedding jitters. Right, honey?" Emily nodded quickly. I said nothing. I told myself it was nothing, stress, nerves, a misunderstanding. Because believing otherwise would have meant admitting that my daughter's future was already cracking. So I smiled through the toast, clinked glasses, and told her father's photo in my wallet, "She's in good hands." A year later, the calls started. Short, careful conversations. She'd talk about work, about how busy Andrew was, how tired she felt. When I asked if everything was all right, she'd say, "Of course, he's just under pressure." I'd heard that line from too many women sitting across interrogation tables, twisting their rings, hiding bruises under sleeves. But when it's your child saying it, you learn to doubt your own instincts. I remember Thanksgiving. She arrived late, wearing a scarf that didn't match her dress. I noticed the edge of a bruise along her jaw when she leaned down to hug me. I reached out, brushed her hair back, and she flinched before smiling. "Car door," she said too quickly. I nodded, even though I'd heard that excuse 100 times before. And still, I said nothing. Because mothers want to believe love makes people better. Because I was tired of fighting ghosts I couldn't arrest anymore. Because I wanted to be her mother, not her detective. After the photo Hayes showed me, all those moments came rushing back like floodwater breaking through the dam. Every quiet dinner where Emily looked smaller in her chair. Every family photo where his hand rested just a little too heavy on her shoulder. Every call where she said, "Don't worry, Mom," like it was a prayer she didn't believe. I opened my old case log again, flipping through the worn pages. Names from another lifetime. Every abuser had the same pattern: charm, control, isolation. Different faces, same script. And I'd watched that script play out under my own roof. I walked to the mantel where Emily's wedding photo hung. Her smile in that picture had always bothered me. It wasn't happiness, it was relief. Like someone who'd convinced herself she'd finally found peace. Now I saw it clearly. Peace had never been part of his vocabulary. I took the photo down and placed it face down on the table. Not out of anger, out of clarity. There's a point when the truth stops hurting and starts sharpening. That's where I was now. Around midnight, the phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You still awake?" It was Linda. Of course it was. I texted back, "Yeah." A pause, then her reply. "He's moving money, offshore, fast, looks like he knows something's coming." My fingers hovered over the screen before typing, "Let him run. He'll leave a trail." She sent one last message, "You in?" I stared at it for a long time, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Finally, I typed, "Always." I set the phone down and turned off the lights. The house plunged into shadow, but I didn't feel alone. The badge in the drawer, the notebook on the desk, the storm outside, they were all pieces of me waking up again. The part I'd buried under years of wanting to be normal. I thought about Emily, about how she once told me, "Mom, you always look like you're waiting for something." Maybe I was. Maybe I'd been waiting for this. Because justice doesn't always knock politely. Sometimes it collapses at your door, covered in bruises, whispering the truth you refused to see. The clock read 3:12 a.m. when I finally closed my eyes. The air smelled like rain again, thick and metallic. And before sleep took me, I whispered into the dark. I saw it coming, I just pretended not to. It was raining again. A slow, deliberate kind of rain that sounded like it was counting down to something. I'd been sitting in the living room, lights off, coffee long gone cold beside me. The house smelled of damp wood and old memories. I didn't know what I was waiting for, maybe another message from Linda. Maybe the next storm warning. But when the knock came, sharp and uneven, I knew. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a stranger. It was something worse. I opened the door and found her there, Emily. Barefoot, soaked, her coat torn at the shoulder, her face pale as the moonlight behind her. For a second, I thought I was dreaming again, the way I had for weeks. Then she stumbled forward, and I caught her before she hit the floor. Her body was trembling, cold and stiff under my hands. Her eyes were swollen, her lip split, the same bruise at the base of her neck I'd seen in that photo from Hayes. It wasn't an echo anymore, it was proof. "Mom," she whispered, voice barely a sound. He beat me. He beat me, for her." I felt her words like glass sliding under skin. I didn't ask who her was. Mistresses always have names, but names don't matter. What matters is what's been taken. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The part of me that was her mother wanted to cradle her. To tell her it was over. But the part of me that had worn a badge for 28 years knew better. It's never over until someone makes it so. I guided her inside, sat her on the couch. The same spot where, years ago, she'd watched Saturday cartoons with her father. She winced as she sat, every motion a confession her lips couldn't make. I fetched the first aid kit from under the sink, my hands steady, my heart not. "Where is he now?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "At home, probably drunk. Said I ruined his life." The words came out in pieces, each one shaking. "He said I made him do it, that I turned him into a monster." Her eyes filled again. "He said I made him angry." I'd heard that line before, from men with cuffs on their wrists. From women with fear in their eyes. And always, it was the same lie. I cleaned the blood from her cheek with a damp cloth. She winced but didn't pull away. "You should call the police," she whispered. I met her gaze. "I am the police." Her breath hitched. "You're retired." I shook my head slowly. "Not tonight." The rain hit harder against the windows, as if the world was listening. Emily leaned back, exhaustion pulling her under. When her breathing evened out, I walked to the hallway closet. The uniform was still there, pressed and waiting. The badge caught the dim light when I lifted it. I hadn't worn it since the day they handed me a pension and a plaque. But tonight, it felt less like nostalgia and more like armor. The weight of it grounded me, steady, deliberate, cold. My phone vibrated on the counter. A text from Linda. "He's at the dockside, private suite, security cam shows he's not alone." I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Across the room, Emily stirred in her sleep. A soft sound escaped her throat, a sob. Or maybe just a dream trying to claw its way out. I sat beside her, brushing the damp hair from her face. "Rest," I murmured. "You're safe now." But we both knew safety was temporary. I walked to the window. The street was empty, a thin mist curling around the lampposts. The kind of night no one would remember clearly. Perfect. I opened the old leather notebook on the kitchen counter. Under subject, Andrew Keller. I added 3 new lines. Update. Victim confirmed. Direct physical evidence visible. Witness. Emily Grant. Action. Pending. The pen felt heavy in my hand. Not from guilt. Guilt had burned out of me years ago. What filled the space now was focus. Cold, disciplined, familiar. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. One ring. Then another. A click. "Case Alpha," I said softly. The voice on the other end didn't ask who I was. "Understood," it replied. I hung up. I turned off the lights, letting the glow from the street lamps spill across the room. Shadows stretched long across the walls, like memories of the past trying to reach for me. I ignored them. In the dim light, I could see the outline of Emily's face, peaceful for the first time in months. She looked younger when she slept, almost like the little girl who used to leave sticky fingerprints on my badge. I brushed a hand over her hair and whispered, "He won't touch you again." The clock read 1:07 a.m. The same blue digits that would burn into my memory forever. I put on the uniform, button by button. The fabric still fit, tighter across the shoulders maybe, but it fit. I slid the badge onto the chest pocket and stared at my reflection. The woman in the mirror didn't look like someone's mother. She looked like a ghost who'd learned how to breathe again. Tired eyes, steady hands. A lifetime of restraint finally ready to move. I picked up my phone one last time. Dialed a different number this time. When the line clicked open, I whispered, "The plan begins tonight." Then I hung up. Outside, the storm had settled into a steady rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled low and long, like a warning, or a promise. The porch light flickered once before holding steady. I stood by the window for a while, watching the faint rise and fall of my daughter's chest. The house, once a sanctuary, had become a command post. Every shadow, every sound, felt like a memory turning into resolve. I poured the coffee I'd forgotten hours ago into the sink, the dark liquid swirling away like everything we'd lost. Then I reached for my keys. "Sleep, baby," I whispered again. She didn't stir. Her breathing stayed soft, even, safe. When I stepped outside, the cold hit me like an old friend. The rain had stopped, but the air still shimmered with it. I locked the door behind me and looked down the empty road. Somewhere out there, he was still awake, still breathing, still believing no one would stop him. He was wrong. The badge caught the light from a passing car, flashing gold for just a second before fading back to shadow. I smiled faintly, a muscle memory I hadn't used in years. Then I started walking toward my car, boots echoing softly against wet pavement. Behind me, the house stood silent, holding its breath. Tomorrow, everything would change again. But tonight, justice had finally found its way home. Morning came without sunlight. Just a gray smear across the horizon, as if the sky hadn't slept either. I sat at the kitchen table in full uniform, the badge catching what little light there was. The coffee in my mug was black and cold. I didn't drink it. My daughter was still asleep on the couch, wrapped in the same blanket I'd tucked around her last night. Her breathing was slow, safe. For now. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of metal and rain, like the aftermath of something you couldn't wash away. I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking. They hadn't shaken in years. That kind of stillness doesn't come from peace. It comes from purpose. I reached for my phone. One new message from Linda. "He's meeting someone at 10. Warehouse District. Bring your old eyes." I typed back, "Copy that." I changed out of the uniform and into jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and an old baseball cap. The badge went into my jacket pocket, out of sight but close enough to feel its weight. Before leaving, I scribbled a note and left it on the kitchen counter beside a fresh glass of water for Emily. "Don't open the door. Don't call him. I'll be back soon." I didn't sign it. She'd know it was me. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. The city was waking up, commuters, buses, the smell of fried eggs and exhaust. It all looked ordinary, like the world hadn't cracked open a few hours ago. That's the thing about mornings, they lie. I pulled into an alley behind an old auto repair shop, where Linda was waiting in her car, engine running low. She rolled down the window when she saw me. "You look like hell," she said, handing me a cup of coffee. "Been busy," I replied. Her gaze flicked to my pocket where the badge outline pressed faintly through the fabric. "Thought you retired. Guess I forgot how." She smiled, tight, knowing. "Warehouse on 7th, she said. "He's meeting someone from a shell company he's been funneling money through. I've got eyes on both exits." I took a sip of the coffee. Bitter. Perfect. "What's the plan?" "Watch, listen, record, and if he slips, catch it." The warehouse sat near the edge of the river, half swallowed by fog. From the outside, it looked abandoned, corrugated walls streaked with rust, a broken sign swinging in the wind. But the security cameras mounted under the eaves told another story. I followed Linda through the side gate and into a small control van she'd parked under an overpass. Inside, 2 monitors flickered in shades of gray. Camera feeds, angles, one on the entrance, one on the interior office. At 10:04 a.m., a black SUV rolled up to the gate. Andrew stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, expression calm, calculated. Even through the grainy feed, he looked like a man who'd convinced himself the world still belonged to him. A second car arrived moments later. A man in a suit climbed out, carrying a briefcase. The handshake between them was short. No smiles. Business, not friendship. Linda adjusted the volume. Their voices came through faintly, filtered through static. Move the rest by Friday, Andrew said. You sure no one's sniffing around? Andrew chuckled, a sound that made my jaw tighten. No one touches me, not in this city. I felt the weight of those words, the arrogance behind them. It wasn't just ego, it was certainty. The kind that comes from years of getting away with things. I'd met men like him before. I'd buried some of them too. Linda leaned back in her seat, arms crossed. He's clean, she murmured, no visible evidence yet. Give it time, I said, he'll hand it to us himself. And he did. At 10:32, he opened the briefcase and pulled out a stack of cash, neatly bound, glinting under the fluorescent light. The other man passed him a folder, contracts, receipts, the paper trail that would burn him alive. Linda hit record. I took a photo on my phone. Proof. Clean, unshakable proof. When the meeting ended, Andrew walked outside, lighting a cigarette. He looked up at the sky, exhaling smoke like he was untouchable. The arrogance of men like him always made me think of gunpowder, calm, silent, waiting for the right spark. I lowered the binoculars. He's not careful anymore, I said. He's scared, Linda corrected. That's when they make mistakes. I nodded. Then let's make sure he keeps being scared. Before leaving, I sent the photos to an encrypted folder on my old police drive. Backup was survival, always had been. Back home, Emily was still asleep. Her face looked softer now, color returning to her skin. For a moment, I let myself believe she could wake up and everything would be different. But scars don't fade because you wish them to. I walked to the desk and powered up my laptop. The screen flickered, then loaded a folder I hadn't opened in years. Domestic Violence Unit, Case Files. Each file was a story. Each story had a name like his. I created a new one. Case name, The Dockside Incident. Subject, Andrew Keller. Witness, Emily Grant. Status, active. Then I transferred the footage. Labeled, timestamped, archived. Order brought calm. Order made chaos bearable. As the files uploaded, I caught my reflection in the screen, tired eyes, gray hair, and something else. Something colder. I remembered what my captain used to say, justice isn't blind. It's patient. I closed the laptop. The plan had already begun. No more warnings, no more hoping. He'd written his own confession in cash and arrogance. All I had to do was finish the paperwork. By nightfall, Emily had woken. She found the note on the counter, her eyes red but dry. When she saw me, she whispered, "You went after him, didn't you?" I didn't answer. She didn't need one. "I don't want you to get hurt," she said. I brushed a hand over her shoulder. "That's not how this works." Her eyes filled again. "He'll find out." "Good," I said softly. "Let him." She stared at me for a long moment, then looked away. There was something in her face I hadn't seen in months, relief, mixed with fear. She didn't understand yet that fear can be turned into armor if you know how to hold it. When the sun went down, I stood on the porch, the night air thick with humidity. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, fading toward the city. I thought of every woman I'd ever promised justice to, every file that ended with, "Case closed, but not safe." I thought of Emily. And then, I thought of him. Inside, my phone buzzed once more. Linda again. "Everything's in place. Tomorrow we tighten the net." I typed back, "He'll never see it coming." The porch light flickered, catching the edge of my badge where it lay on the table inside. For years, I'd thought that badge was my identity. Now I realized, it was just a reminder of what I'd been trained to do. I turned off the light and whispered to the dark. "You crossed the line, Andrew, and I'm still the line." The night was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the steady rhythm of the clock. Each tick was a heartbeat, counting down to what came next. Justice wasn't a storm, it was a slow, cold tide. And it had already started to rise. The next morning, the sky was too bright. Not warm, not hopeful, just bright. Like the world had the nerve to keep turning after everything it had seen. I stood in front of the mirror, running a comb through my hair. The lines around my eyes looked deeper. They weren't from age, they were from watching too much and saying too little. Emily was awake when I walked into the kitchen. She sat by the window, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, but the swelling on her lip had started to fade. "You didn't sleep," I said. She shook her head. "Neither did you," she replied softly. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was heavy. Like both of us knew words couldn't fix what was broken. Finally, she whispered, "What are you going to do?" I didn't look at her. What I should have done years ago. Her voice cracked. "You're not the police anymore." "No," I said, "but justice doesn't need a paycheck." I grabbed my keys, slid the badge into my pocket, and stepped toward the door. Emily's voice followed me, thin and trembling. "Please, Mom, don't go near him." I paused, hand on the doorknob. "When you were little," I said quietly, "you used to tell me monsters weren't real." Her eyes glistened. "They are," I continued, "but sometimes, they wear wedding rings." Then I left. The drive to Andrew's house was short. I knew the route by heart. I'd helped them move in. Back then, the lawn was perfect, the shutters freshly painted, the kind of house that looked like it came with a warranty for happiness. Now the paint was peeling. The garden was overgrown. The place had the stillness of something that had stopped pretending. His car sat in the driveway, spotless as always. He'd always been meticulous about appearances. I parked across the street, turned off the engine, and waited a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling motor. Then I stepped out and walked toward the door. He answered after the second knock. For a moment, his expression was almost friendly. Then he saw my face. "Mom," he said, smiling like the word could erase everything. What a surprise. That word, Mom, tasted wrong in his mouth. "Andrew," I said evenly, "we need to talk." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room. Of course, always happy to see family. The air inside smelled like expensive cologne and whiskey. I'd spent enough years around both to know the difference between confidence and rot. He motioned toward the table. "Coffee? Tea?" "No." He poured himself a drink anyway, the ice clinking as if to remind me who was in control here. Then he leaned against the counter and smiled. "You've been busy." My jaw tightened. "Have I?" "Linda's car," he said, nodding toward the window. "You really think I wouldn't notice someone following me?" So he'd seen her. He wasn't as oblivious as I hoped. I didn't answer. Instead, I studied him the way I used to study suspects, body language. Eyes, posture. He was confident, but there was a twitch in his jaw, a pulse jumping at his neck. Fear, well hidden but there. "I know what you're doing," he said. "You think you can ruin me. You can't." I kept my voice calm. "No one needs to ruin you. Andrew, you've done that yourself." He laughed, low and cruel. "You think anyone's going to believe your washed-up stories? You're a retired cop. She's a hysterical woman. That's your case file." I let him talk. Men like him always do their own cross-examination. Then he leaned forward, his smile flattening. "You tell her to stay out of my business, or I'll finish what I started." The words landed like a knife, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I took a slow step closer. "You're right," I said softly. "I'm not a cop anymore. Which means I don't have to write reports or follow rules. I don't have to warn you or arrest you." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the photo Officer Hayes had given me, the one from the garage. I placed it on the counter between us. He looked down. His face went still. "Nice picture," I said. "I've got more, and a recording from yesterday's meeting at the warehouse. I'm guessing the IRS would love that." His nostrils flared. "You think you're smart?" I shrugged. "No, just thorough." For the first time, his hand shook. He tried to hide it by finishing his drink, but the ice rattled against the glass. "You don't scare me," he said finally. I smiled faintly. "That's the thing about fear. You don't feel it until it's already too late. He took a step forward, closing the space between us. You think you're protecting her? You're just making it worse. She needs me. No, I said, she needed you to stop. He blinked, unsure how to respond. The silence between us stretched, heavy and electric. Then I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. Next time you lift a hand to her, Andrew, I won't call the police. I'll call a coroner. His expression cracked. For a second, I saw what Emily must have seen all those years, the anger, the fear, the desperate need for control. Then it vanished behind a smirk. You should leave before I decide to file a harassment complaint, he said. I didn't move. Instead, I pointed to the small camera clipped to my coat pocket. The red light blinked once. Already recording, I said, thanks for the confession. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I turned and walked toward the door. The air outside felt colder, cleaner. I'd expected to feel relief. Instead, I felt something sharper, a calm that wasn't peace. As I opened my car door, I glanced back once. He stood at the window, watching me, a glass still in his hand. His smile was gone. Good. Driving home, the rain began again. The wipers beat a steady rhythm, each pass wiping away another layer of hesitation. The camera on my dash blinked, recording everything. Every lie, every truth, every breath of the man who thought he was untouchable. When I reached the end of my street, I saw the porch light still on. Emily was waiting by the window, her face pale but calm. I parked, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes, it just breathed quietly before it struck. Inside, she met me at the door. You saw him? Yes. Her voice shook. What did he say? Nothing worth remembering. She looked at me, searching for something. Mercy. Maybe. But mercy is for people who stop before the first bruise. He didn't. I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. It's over, I said. It wasn't, not yet. But she needed to believe it for one more night. I went to my desk, pulled the memory card from the pocket camera, and slid it into my laptop. The file loaded instantly, his voice, his threats, his arrogance, all captured in crisp sound. Proof. Clean, undeniable. As I saved the footage, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The storm hadn't passed after all. It was circling back. I closed the laptop, looked out the window, and whispered to the dark. Tomorrow, you'll answer to someone who doesn't flinch. The next day began like any other, gray sky, the smell of rain still clinging to the earth, and a silence that felt too heavy to be peace. I stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs before realizing I only needed 1. Old habits die slow. Emily was still asleep in the living room. She looked fragile, but at least the color had returned to her face. Her breathing was steady. I needed that sound. It reminded me that this time, I wasn't too late. I slipped the small flash drive from last night's recording into my pocket. It felt heavier than it should have. Not because of what it contained, but because of what it confirmed. The truth I had been avoiding for years was now carved into digital proof. He was guilty. He'd always been. And the law, the system I'd served for nearly 3 decades, might still fail to stop him. But I wasn't the system anymore. I was free from the rules that made monsters comfortable. By noon, I was sitting in a small diner off Highway 9. The kind of place where the coffee never stops pouring and the waitress knows everyone's life story by the second cup. Linda was already there, sitting in our usual booth near the back. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun. Her badge still clipped to her belt even though she was technically retired too. She waved me over. Rough night, she asked as I slid into the seat across from her. I just nodded. She poured me some coffee from the pot sitting between us. Tell me you didn't go see him alone. I took a sip before answering. He saw me, that's all that matters. Her expression darkened. You recorded him? I slid the flash drive across the table. Every word. She picked it up, turning it between her fingers like a coin she wasn't sure she wanted to spend. "This could bury him," she said quietly. "That's the plan." Linda leaned back, studying me. "You remember what Internal used to say? Evidence like this disappears when it gets too close to the wrong people." "I'm not turning it in yet," I said, "not until the rest is ready." Her eyebrows lifted. "There's a rest." "There always is." We ate in silence for a while, the hum of the diner filling the gaps. Outside, trucks rumbled past, spraying water across the windows. Finally, Linda said, "You're not just gathering evidence, are you?" I looked up. "No." She sighed. "You were always the calm one. The patient one. The one who believed the system worked if you just pushed hard enough." Maybe that was before the system let my daughter bleed. That ended the conversation for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "What do you need from me?" I smiled faintly. "Your eyes, your instincts, and your old contacts." She chuckled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You want me to pull strings. I want a safety net. If this goes bad, someone has to make sure he doesn't crawl out of it." She looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "You really are coming back, aren't you?" "I never left," I said. We drove together to her office, a converted garage lined with filing cabinets and old caseboxes. The walls smelled faintly of coffee and dust. She still worked as a private investigator on small cases, missing spouses, insurance fraud, the kind of quiet corruption that paid the bills. But her instincts were as sharp as ever. She powered on her computer and inserted the flash drive. The audio filled the room. Andrew's voice. Smooth, confident, dripping with arrogance. "You tell her to stay out of my business, or I'll finish what I started." Linda froze, her hand hovering over the mouse. "Jesus," she muttered. I watched her face harden, the same way mine had the night before. "That's not a man who's going to stop," she said. "No," I replied, "that's a man who thinks he's untouchable." She clicked pause, turned to me. "So what's your next move?" "I make sure he touches fire." She pulled out a folder from the filing cabinet labeled Client Archive and flipped it open. "Here," she said, sliding a card across the desk. "Private security contact. Owes me a favor. He can install covert mics. Maybe help track financials without alerting anyone." I took the card. "Linda," I said quietly, "if this gets ugly, I want you out." She laughed under her breath. "You think I'd let you have all the fun?" We spent the next hour reviewing the file structure, planning what would happen once Andrew's transactions went public. Every detail mattered: time, evidence, witnesses, backup. It wasn't revenge, it was math. Cold, precise, inevitable. When I stood to leave, Linda caught my arm. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Because once you start, there's no walking away." I looked her straight in the eye. He crossed the line when he put his hands on her. I'm just erasing the line he thinks protects him. Linda nodded. "Then you're not doing this alone." She pulled a small envelope from her desk drawer and handed it to me. Inside was a spare key and a burner phone. "Use this number. It's clean. If you ever text me the word candle, I'll know you need backup." I tucked it into my pocket. "You always did have a flair for code names." She smiled. "You always did need someone to watch your six." The sky had begun to clear when I left her office. For the first time in days, sunlight filtered through the clouds, thin and pale. I drove with the window slightly open, the wind cutting through the stale air inside the car. The world smelled alive again, even if only for a moment. At a stoplight, I glanced at my phone. A text from Linda. "Got your back, partner." I smiled faintly. The word partner hit something deep in me, something I'd buried when I turned in my badge. For a moment, I didn't feel like a mother drowning in guilt. I felt like who I used to be, a woman who made monsters answer for what they'd done. When I got home, Emily was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket. She looked small, but her eyes were clearer now. She smiled when she saw me. The kind of fragile smile that people wear when they're learning how to hope again. "Where were you?" she asked. "Talking to a friend." About him? I nodded. She hesitated, then said, "You're not planning something stupid, are you?" I sat beside her. "No, honey, just something overdue." She looked at the street. Her voice barely a whisper. "He used to bring me flowers after every fight." I said nothing. "I kept every bouquet," she continued, "until I realized they weren't apologies, they were trophies." The air went still between us. Sometimes, silence is the only way to honor the truth. I reached over and took her hand. "You don't have to face him again." Her eyes glistened. "Then who will?" "I will," I said simply. That night, as she slept, I opened my laptop. A new message blinked from Linda. "Package delivered. He'll bite soon." Attached was a single image, a screenshot of an email sent anonymously to Andrew's work account. The subject line read, "Inquiry from the IRS." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The net was tightening. Every lie he told was about to choke him in his own words. I closed the computer, stood, and looked out the window. The moon was high, casting pale light across the porch. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint hum of the city, alive with secrets. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm, not peaceful, not forgiving, just certain. The kind of certainty that only comes when justice has finally started moving. I turned off the lamp and whispered into the dark. "Sleep, Emily. Tomorrow, he learns what it means to be afraid." By morning, the air had shifted. The world felt too still, like the city was holding its breath. Even the birds outside were quiet. That kind of silence always meant something was about to break. I brewed coffee but never drank it. The smell filled the kitchen anyway, burnt, bitter, grounding. Emily was awake, sitting by the window again, staring out at the road that led nowhere good. She hadn't asked where I went yesterday, and I hadn't offered. Some truths don't need to be said aloud to be shared. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred sugar into her cup. "He called last night," she said softly. I looked up from my phone. "Did you answer?" She shook her head. "He left a message, said he wanted to talk, said he was sorry." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. "He's never sorry." "No," I said, "he's scared." She swallowed, her throat tightening. "You did something, didn't you?" I didn't reply. Her gaze searched mine, then softened. "Whatever you're doing, Mom, don't let it destroy you too." I reached over and placed my hand over hers. "Sweetheart, I've already been destroyed. I'm just using what's left." By noon, I was downtown again. The warehouse district looked different in daylight, less haunting, more hollow. The kind of place where bad deals die quietly. Linda was waiting in the van. Same spot as before. She had a coffee in one hand and a camera feed on the monitor in front of her. "You're early," she said. "So is Justice," I replied. She smirked but didn't argue. On the screen, Andrew's office came into view, marble floors, glass walls, the kind of sterile perfection that hides filth underneath. "Everything's in place," Linda said. "Our guy from security delivered the package." I watched the feed closely. "What package?" "A fake deal," she said, "a wire transfer from a shell account tied to his mistress's name. When he signs it, it links back to a dummy corporation, fraud and bribery all in one neat little bow." I raised an eyebrow. "You've been busy." She grinned. "You taught me well." At 12:47 p.m., the elevator doors opened on screen. Andrew stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, expression confident, almost smug. He walked straight into his office, poured himself a drink, and started reviewing documents on his desk. He had no idea the ink he was about to spill would write his own confession. Linda hit record. On the second monitor, another feed showed a small microphone planted beneath his desk, clean audio. Clear as breath. We watched him pace, talk, laugh. Then his tone shifted. "Transfer the full amount today," he said into the phone. "If anyone asks, say it was a charity fund. We've done this before." He chuckled. "No one ever checks." Linda and I exchanged a look. That was the sound of a man building his own noose. He hung up and sat back, scrolling through his phone. The email popped up on his screen, a fake inquiry from the IRS. He frowned, clicked it open, and the camera caught the moment his jaw tightened. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by something sharp and panicked. He reached for his phone again, dialing fast. "Get me Carter," he snapped. "Now, the auditors sent something. I need this cleaned up before it leaks." He waited. The line didn't connect. Linda smiled, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. "Guess who rerouted his network?" "You?" She winked. "You're not the only one who doesn't play by the rules anymore." By 1:15 p.m., he was sweating. The feed caught every move, him ripping through papers, deleting files, pacing. The sound of his panic filled the van like static. "Let him twist," Linda muttered. "The longer he panics, the sloppier he gets." I watched, silent. Every breath he took, every curse that left his mouth, it was all part of the unraveling. For years, men like him had counted on the silence of others. Now, the silence was working against him. Finally, he called someone else. The voice on the other end came through faintly. A woman, the mistress. He hissed through clenched teeth. "They're on to us. Did you talk to anyone?" She stammered, denied, pleaded. He cut her off. "You said this was clean. You said no one would find out." The rage cracked his composure. "That was what we needed." Linda saved the audio file. "Got him," she said. I nodded, eyes still fixed on the screen. "He's going to run." "That's what we want," she replied. "We'll be waiting where he lands." By evening, I was home again. The rain had started up, soft at first, then harder, drumming against the windows. Emily sat on the couch, staring at the muted television. The screen showed a local news report about financial misconduct at a downtown bank, his bank. She looked at me as I entered. "They're investigating him," she said, voice shaking. I nodded. "Good. You did this?" "Yes." She covered her mouth with her hands. Not out of fear, but disbelief. "Mom, if they find out what you did." "They won't." "And if they do?" I met her eyes. "Then I'll deal with it. Like I've dealt with everything else." She stared at me for a long time before whispering, "You're not doing this for justice anymore." I smiled faintly. Maybe not. Maybe it's for peace. Later that night, Linda called. "Package delivered," she said. "He's cornered. It's only a matter of time before the warrants roll in." I exhaled slowly. Let him run a little longer. Panic leaves footprints. "You're enjoying this," she said. "Not enjoying," I replied, remembering. "Remembering what?" "What it feels like to be the one holding the light." I hung up and walked to the window. The rain blurred the streetlights into halos, the way tears blur memories. Across the room, Emily slept again, curled up beneath her blanket. Her face was soft, unguarded, safe. For the first time in years, I felt like the house could breathe again. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the faint glow from the porch. The reflection in the glass looked older, sharper. The kind of woman who'd lost everything once and decided never to lose again. I whispered into the dark. "Run, Andrew, run as far as you can. The world's smaller than you think." The storm outside grew heavier, wind howling through the eaves. The kettle whistled behind me. I poured 1 cup of tea and carried it to the table. Across from me, the empty chair sat in its usual place. I imagined my husband there, the way he used to be, hands steady, voice calm. He'd probably tell me I'd gone too far. But he wasn't here. And this time, too far was exactly where justice lived. The clock struck midnight. The tea had gone cold, but I didn't care. I just sat there, listening to the storm, feeling it move closer, knowing what came next. Tomorrow, he'd make one more mistake. And when he did, I'd be waiting. The morning after the storm, the air felt clean. Too clean. Like the world had washed itself but left the dirt where it mattered most, inside people. I woke before sunrise. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the old clock in the hallway. I stood there for a long moment, watching the shadows fade into gray light. It had been days since I'd slept, but I didn't feel tired. Justice doesn't sleep, it waits. Emily was still asleep on the couch, her face peaceful, soft in the early light. I tucked the blanket around her shoulders and whispered, "Almost over." She didn't hear me, and that was fine. Some promises are meant to be silent. By 7 a.m., I was in the car, driving toward downtown. The sky was bruised purple, clouds heavy but breaking apart. The city looked almost new under that strange, forgiving light. Almost. Linda's voice came through the speaker as soon as I started the car. "He's in his office," she said, "looks nervous. Phone calls, pacing, checking the window every few seconds." "Any movement from the feds?" "On standby. They'll move the second I drop the footage. I'm just waiting for your word." I gripped the steering wheel. "No," I said quietly, "not yet. He needs to feel it first." She sighed. "You're playing with fire." I built the match. By 8:30, I was parked across the street from Keller Financial. From where I sat, I could see the corner office, the glass one that used to be a symbol of power. Now, it was just a cage made of reflections. He stood inside, tie loose, phone pressed to his ear, shouting at someone I couldn't hear. A man unraveling. For years, he'd been the one controlling every room he walked into. Now, every shadow looked like a witness. I checked my phone. A new message from Linda. "It's time." Attached was a file. IRS inquiry forwarded to Federal Task Force. That meant one thing. This was the last morning he'd wake up free. I watched him through the glass as the first sirens began to echo in the distance. He froze. Then his hand went to the blinds, snapping them shut. Too late. The black cars arrived like thunder. 3 unmarked sedans, 1 armored van. Agents in plain clothes stepped out, badges flashing in the morning light. The street went still. Even traffic seemed to hold its breath. Through the glass, I saw him shout something, grab his briefcase, and bolt toward the private elevator. Cowards always run toward escape, never toward reason. Linda's voice came over the line. "He's trying to leave through the garage." "I know," I said, "let him." I turned the key, engine roaring to life. The adrenaline was sharp and familiar. A taste I hadn't missed but recognized instantly. It wasn't excitement, it was justice about to collide with reality. By the time I reached the side of the building, the agents were already there, 2 at the gate, 1 at the ramp. Andrew's car came screeching down, his eyes wide, breath fast. The moment he saw the badges, he slammed on the brakes, tires screaming. "Andrew Keller," one agent shouted, "step out of the vehicle." He didn't. He just sat there, gripping the wheel, chest heaving, panic turning into rage. The agent repeated the command. He finally opened the door, stepping out slow, calculating, trying to find the lie that could save him. When the cuffs clicked around his wrists, his head dropped. For a split second, he looked smaller, not the monster who broke my daughter, not the arrogant man in the suit. Just another criminal who thought power could protect him. The camera from a nearby news van caught the moment, the badge glint. The cuffs, the silence. The city would see what monsters really looked like. I didn't step out of the car. Didn't need to. Justice didn't need applause, it only needed completion. So I sat there, watching, heart steady, breath quiet. When he looked up, our eyes met for half a second through the rain-streaked windshield. He knew. He finally knew. He shouted something, voice muffled by distance and glass. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I'd heard every lie before, every excuse, every threat, every plea. They all end the same way, silence and handcuffs. By noon, the story broke. Financial executive arrested in fraud and abuse investigation. His face flashed across every local channel, followed by statements from the DA, the FBI, the firm. Words like integrity, betrayal, justice. The kind of vocabulary people dust off when they realize how easily evil hides in plain sight. Linda called. "It's done," she said. I closed my eyes. "No, it's starting." "What do you mean?" "He'll try to make me pay for it, even from behind bars." Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Let him try." When I got home, Emily was watching the same news report. Her face was pale, her hands pressed together like she was praying. When she saw me, her lips parted, but no sound came out. Finally, she whispered, "You did this." I sat beside her, not denying it. She looked back at the screen, tears in her eyes. "Mom, they're saying he might serve 20 years. "Good," I said, "he'll have plenty of time to remember." She turned toward me, voice trembling. "You're not happy." I shook my head. "Justice doesn't make you happy. It makes you quiet." She reached for my hand. "I thought you wanted him punished." "I wanted him stopped," I said. "Punishment's just paperwork." For a long moment, we sat there in silence, the flicker of the TV painting shadows across the room. Then Emily whispered, "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of what comes next." I looked at her, really looked at her. The daughter I almost lost to a man who mistook love for control. "You heal," I said softly. "That's what comes next." That night, the house was still again. But it was a different kind of still, not haunted, not broken. Just tired. I stood in the kitchen, washing the same mug I'd used every morning of the storm. The water ran clear this time. Through the window, I could see the reflection of my badge on the counter, faint, almost invisible. For years, I'd worn it as proof that I was fighting for good. But tonight, I realized it wasn't the badge that made me who I was. It was the promise behind it, a promise I'd made to every woman who ever whispered he hit me and didn't think anyone would listen. The clock struck midnight. Somewhere downtown, a cell door slammed shut. And in that moment, the world finally exhaled. I dried my hands, turned off the light, and stood in the doorway one last time. Outside, the storm clouds were gone. The stars looked sharp against the black sky, like tiny witnesses. "Justice doesn't need rage," I murmured, "it just needs precision." And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to close my eyes. The news didn't fade the way I thought it would. It lingered. Every morning, his name was still there, on headlines, on talk shows, whispered in grocery store aisles. Local banker arrested in federal investigation. Abuse allegations confirmed. They said his full name every time, sharp and clear, like it finally meant something other than success. I watched the reports once. Just once. The rest, I let the world handle. Justice wasn't mine anymore, it belonged to the public now. That was fine, that was the point. The house felt different in the days that followed. Still quiet, but not heavy. The kind of silence that comes after a long cry, the one that leaves you hollow but lighter. Emily stayed close. She cooked sometimes, mostly to keep her hands busy. She watered the plants I'd forgotten about. We didn't talk about him much, except when the mail came. Envelopes with his name, court notices, attorney letters. I'd stack them in a drawer, unopened. He didn't get to live here anymore, not even in ink. One evening, she found me sitting by the window, staring at the porch light. "You've been quiet," she said softly. "Quiet feels right," I replied. She sat beside me, her hand finding mine. "I thought it would feel better," she admitted, "knowing he's gone." "It doesn't?" She shook her head. "It feels strange, like part of me is still waiting for him to walk through that door." I squeezed her hand. "That's normal. Fear leaves fingerprints. It takes time to scrub them off." She leaned her head on my shoulder. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch when I reached over to hold her. A week later, the newspapers stopped calling. The reporters moved on to fresher stories, new faces, new scandals. That's how justice works in this world. Loud one day, forgotten the next. But for the people left behind, it doesn't fade. It settles in your bones. A quiet ache that doesn't go away. I spent my mornings in the garden again. The roses had started to bloom late, but they were strong this year, thorns sharper, colors deeper. I trimmed them slowly, the way my husband used to, careful not to cut too much at once. Emily watched from the porch, wrapped in a blanket. "You never stop taking care of things," she said. "Someone has to." One afternoon, a letter arrived from the district attorney's office. It was short, 2 paragraphs. Polite and professional. Case closed. Sentencing scheduled. They thanked me for my cooperation. They didn't thank me for the years I'd spent watching my daughter disappear into silence. Or for the nights I stayed awake listening for footsteps. But they didn't need to. That's not what justice does. Emily opened the letter after I did. She didn't say anything, just folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. Then she looked at me and whispered, "He can't hurt me anymore." "No," I said, "he can't." And for the first time, I believed it. A few nights later, we sat outside on the porch. The air smelled of rain and cut grass. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Emily traced circles on her mug with her fingertip. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Everything. The plan, the way you handled it." I looked out at the streetlights, each one haloed in the mist. "No," I said after a long pause. "I regret waiting so long." She nodded slowly. "I used to think you were cold," she said, "like you didn't feel things the way other people do." "I feel everything," I told her. "I just learned to hide it better." Her eyes glistened. "You shouldn't have had to." "Neither should you." We sat there a while longer, listening to the hum of the quiet neighborhood. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being the kind of mother who didn't give up." I smiled faintly. "That's the only kind I know how to be." The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling through the window. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of dread pressing down on my chest. It was still there, faint, like an old scar, but it didn't hurt anymore. I brewed a pot of coffee, poured 2 cups, and carried one to the porch. Emily joined me a few minutes later, hair still messy from sleep. She sat beside me, pulling her knees to her chest. "Do you ever miss Dad?" she asked quietly. "Every day," I said, "but I think he'd be proud of you." Her voice cracked. "I hope so. I know so." We watched the street in silence, the way people do when they've survived something they can't put into words. The world looked ordinary again, birds, cars, mail trucks, but it wasn't. It never would be. That afternoon, Linda came by. She didn't say much, just handed me a folded newspaper. "Page 6, she said. I opened it. There he was, Andrew Keller, sentenced to 17 years, with the possibility of parole after 12. The photo showed him in a gray jumpsuit, hands cuffed, eyes hollow. A headline that once would have made him proud now looked like an obituary for the man he pretended to be. Linda watched me. "Closure?" I shook my head. "Closure's a myth." She nodded. "Yeah, but it's something close." We sat there on the porch, 3 cups of coffee between us, not saying much. Sometimes, silence is the truest conversation there is. When the sun began to set, Emily came outside again, carrying a small envelope. She placed it in my hand. "What's this?" "Something I wrote for him," she said, "but I don't want to send it." I opened it carefully. It wasn't a letter. It was a single line, written in her neat handwriting. "You don't own me anymore." I looked up at her. "That's enough," I said softly. She nodded. "I know." We burned it in the fire pit behind the house. The paper curled into ash, the flames soft and orange. When it was done, she whispered, "Goodbye." And I think she meant it. That night, before bed, I walked through the house one last time. The photos on the wall felt different now, not haunted, just history. When I reached the mantel, I stopped in front of my uniform. It still hung in its case, clean and pressed. I traced the badge with my fingertips. "Justice doesn't need rage," I murmured. "It needs patience." And women like us. The house was quiet again. But this time, the quiet didn't feel like waiting. It felt like rest. It rained again the following week. Not a violent storm like before, just a soft drizzle. The kind that blurs the world into something almost gentle. The kind of rain that feels more like cleansing than punishment. I stood by the window, watching the drops slide down the glass in crooked trails. Outside, the garden was quiet. The roses glistened, bent under the weight of the rain but refusing to break. Funny, I thought, they looked stronger wet than they ever did in sunlight. Behind me, the house was still. No more phone calls, no reporters, no fear. Just air, light, and the faint scent of coffee lingering from the morning. I turned and looked toward the uniform hanging by the mantel. For years, it had been a reminder of who I was, an officer. A protector, a fighter. But now, it looked like something else. A chapter that had done its job. I took it down carefully, the way you handle something sacred. The fabric was still stiff, the color still deep navy, but it felt lighter in my hands. I folded it slowly, pressing each crease flat. When I placed it back into the cedar chest by the window, it felt final. Not like burying something, but like returning it to peace. Emily came in a few minutes later. She had a grocery bag in one hand and that small, familiar smile that didn't quite reach her eyes yet. But it was getting closer. "You're putting it away?" she asked, glancing at the chest. "Yes. Forever?" I nodded. "It's time." She looked at me for a moment, then said softly, "You know, I think he would have been proud." "Who?" "Dad," she said. I smiled faintly. "Maybe. He always liked clean endings." She set the bag on the counter, unpacking bread, milk, and a bouquet of daisies. "They were on sale," she said, as if that mattered. I took the flowers, found an old glass jar, and filled it with water. We placed them in the center of the table, right beside the scar on the wood where my husband once set down a hot pan and laughed about it for days. Life leaves its marks, so does love. That evening, the two of us ate dinner together for the first time in a long while. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread. But the air felt different. Warmer, quieter, whole. The news on the television droned softly in the background, politics. Weather, another scandal in another city. No one said his name anymore. The world had moved on. Emily looked up from her bowl. "Do you think he ever thinks about us?" I didn't hesitate. "Every day, that's what guilt does. It doesn't disappear, it lingers." She stared at the table. "Good." I reached across and touched her hand. "You don't need to carry him anymore." Her eyes filled, but she smiled. "I know." And when she said it, I believed her. After dinner, she went to her room. I stayed behind, cleaning up the dishes, the same rhythm I'd done for decades. The house hummed with a soft kind of life. The good kind, the kind you don't notice until it's been gone too long. When I finished, I poured myself a cup of tea and stepped outside to the porch. The night air was cool and smelled faintly of rain and lilacs. Across the street, the neighbors' lights were out, and the whole neighborhood felt like it was sleeping. Except me. I sat in the rocking chair, the same one my husband built the year Emily was born. The wood creaked softly beneath me, the sound blending with the crickets and the distant hum of the highway. Somewhere downtown, in a concrete cell, a man who once called himself my son-in-law was counting the days. And here, under the same moonlight, my daughter was finally sleeping without fear. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers. And tonight, it was whispering that we had survived. I thought of all the women I'd met through the years, those who'd come into the station with bruises hidden under makeup. Voices small as paper. They all said the same thing: he promised he'd change. I used to nod, take their statements, and hope the system worked. But hope doesn't protect anyone. Truth does. And sometimes, truth wears a badge. Sometimes, it just wears a mother's face. I closed my eyes and let the memories pass like shadows. The knock at 1 a.m. The blood on my daughter's lip. The trembling voice that said, "He beat me for his mistress." And the moment I picked up the phone and whispered, "The plan begins tonight," I had kept that promise. Not because I was brave, but because she was still alive to make it matter. When I opened my eyes, dawn was breaking, soft, pink light spilling over the roofs. I could hear birds again. It had been months since they sang this close. I went back inside, set my empty cup on the table, and reached for my notebook. The same one I'd used to track cases all those years ago. I flipped to the last page. Underneath Case Alpha, Keller, Andrew, I wrote 2 new words. Status, closed. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then I closed the book, placed it in the drawer, and locked it. Some endings don't need noise. By mid-morning, Emily woke up and joined me on the porch. She had her coffee, I had mine. The sun was higher now, warming the dew off the grass. She took a deep breath. "It feels different today." "It is," I said. "What do we do now?" I looked at her and smiled. "We live." She laughed softly, and the sound filled the space between us like light. No fear, no ghosts, just 2 women sitting quietly in the aftermath of survival. A car passed by, slow, the driver nodding politely. Normalcy. I hadn't realized how beautiful it was until I lost it. I looked at the sky and whispered, mostly to myself, I didn't want revenge, I wanted peace. And for the first time in years, I felt it, steady, real, earned. When the mail came that afternoon, there was a small envelope addressed to me. No return name, no address, just my name in neat handwriting. Inside was a single photo, me, years ago, in uniform, shaking hands with a woman outside the precinct. On the back, someone had written, "Justice served." No signature, but I didn't need one. Linda always did like her quiet poetry. I smiled, slipped the photo into the frame on my shelf beside my husband's picture, and stepped back. The 3 of us, him, me, and Emily, finally together in the same frame of peace. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood by the window one last time. The garden shimmered in gold, the air thick with the smell of rain and roses. I thought of all that had been taken, and all that had been returned. And I realized something I hadn't before. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration. About giving back what fear stole. I turned off the lights, walked to the hallway, and paused in the doorway of Emily's room. She was asleep, one arm over her head, her face peaceful. I smiled and whispered, "You're safe, baby, finally." Then I went to my own room, set the alarm for morning, and lay down. The bed felt softer than I remembered. The quiet didn't hurt anymore. As sleep pulled me under, I thought of my husband's voice, steady, calm, certain. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered back to him. I kept her safe. The rain outside slowed to a stop. The night exhaled. And the story ended the way it was always meant to. Not with vengeance, but with peace.